Hi, this is Shambhavi. Welcome to my weekly podcast about spirituality, love, death, devotion, and waking up while living in a messy world. The Satsang with Shambhavi podcast is recorded live each week with students of our nonprofit community, Jaya Kula. For more information and to find out about attending a satsang, visit jayakula.org. Thanks for listening. Much love to you, wherever and however you are. So fatalism comes in a lot of different forms. And one of the forms is, I'm this way because of my psychology, my childhood, my astrology, whatever your favorite thing is. And not just to say that as an explanation, but also to be happy that you found an explanation and you're just ready to leave it at that. It's kind of a reason for not doing anything about whatever it is that you're ascribing to something that you can't change. So fatalism means when we say we can't change something, or it's just my fate to be this way, and then we have some explanation as to why we can't change it. First of all, any explanation that we have is partial. It's not even close to a full explanation, not even a whisper of an explanation, because we are an infinite event. Every one of us is totally open to time and space, to many, many other beings that have gone into causing this particular thing to pop out somewhere. So any explanation that you give for yourself is very limited to this lifetime, or maybe like some other inkling of some other lifetime you have. But actually the reality of your circumstance and why you are the way you are overflows any explanation. It's absolutely without a boundary, and there's no way to explain it, actually. So that's the reality of our situation. And then our obsession with explaining everything is part of our human realm inheritance. Imagine there could be a culture where explaining things wasn't that important. Why this? Why that? Well, because that there could be a culture where none of that happened, where people just lived and felt things and appreciated them and worked with them, but didn't feel the need to explain them as a way of resolving them. So here's one way that you'll really find yourself having distaste for explanations. And you might have heard me say this before, and you're fairly new, but I do say this quite regularly, which is that our obsession in Western culture with explaining ourselves, especially with respect to our childhoods, comes from one place. It comes from a 19th century middle-class Jewish person in Austria named Sigmund Freud, who was very, very keen to be respected and accepted into upper crusty Austrian society and scientific culture. And his whole method was explanation. And he was extremely supremacist about it and proud of it. So a lot of you, if you went to a typical college, you had some psychology class where you read some of Sigmund Freud's case studies. That's a very common thing to read in college. And if you read his case studies, they all go the same way. This patient told me this, or they told me this dream. Here are all the elements of it. This means this means that, this came from there, this is the explanation for this. And then at the end of it, he says, and now I think I have explained everything to my satisfaction. So this whole idea that we're going to resolve something by explaining how we are and why we are comes from that method. It's not pretty. I mean, whoever really proved that explaining ourselves was going to resolve anything? One of my teachers used to go, like, imagine yourself on your deathbed. You're with your beloved. You're both dying at the same time. And she says, did I explain everything to your satisfaction? Yes. And then the other person says, did I explain everything to your satisfaction? Yes. Does anyone really care at that point? So there are other methods of working with ourselves other than that, other than explanations, other than finding out why or what the origin of something was or the root of something. Then, if we're talking about fatalism, I was just thinking about this the other day. I've made a decision, if I can remember my own decision, that I'm just going to stop capitalizing any identities, anybody's first name, any country names, any state names, any city names, because when we capitalize something, we're saying there's some aura of permanence to it. And none of these things are permanent. They're all absolutely impermanent. So I'm just going to stop capitalizing any of that. I made this decision about a week ago, and then I kept forgetting. I mean, like backspace and uncapitalize, but I'll get the hang of it. So absolutely, absolutely everything here is an aspect of impermanence, which means it's fluid. So what does that mean? It means that we can work with everything. Fatalism, if we say something's fate and we want to be actually more real about it, what we're saying is it's difficult to change. But absolutely everything can be changed. And that is a great opportunity for us. Of course, we don't want things to change often. That's why we indulge in fatalism, because we'd like to fix a sense of self and fix our circumstances. We'd like to know what's going on, even if it's bad. People say gleefully about their astrology charts, I have a problem, but it's like a fixed karma, and they're actually happy about it because then they don't have to do anything. And they feel even more secure with unchanging problems. Right. So anyway, it's stagnation. But fortunately, the river of life just keeps moving, and everything gets swept along with it. Fortunately for us. And eventually we get this and we learn to enjoy it more. But if it weren't true, spiritual life would be much more difficult. Much less open to possibilities. So just don't have an explanation. All of your explanations are crap. That's the end of my riff. I give this riff periodically, because periodically someone asks a question like this.
I was kind of just reflecting on my own teachers and the ones that I've been gifted along the way. But specifically kind of pertaining to dance and mentors of that sort. I feel like I have such wonderful people who want to give me knowledge, but it's hard for me to keep following up. I just fall off the communication wagon, and I tend to have these very guilty feelings of oh, I'm such a bad student. I just can't keep up, or I just want to do it more, and I just can't. And there are just certain things in my life that just don't happen.
Well, in terms of communications with teachers, this shaman I went to once told me something very useful. She said basically that I'd been connected to too many teachers, and that I had overblown or exaggerated the feeling that I had toward them. And that in some cases they had done that to me. She said it wasn't just me always trying to make these connections, but it was other teachers also trying to do it with me. And then I just accumulated too much teacher lint over the years. So she told me to think of a teacher that, just any teacher, and I thought of Rudy, Swami Rudranajan. And she said, okay, so how do you feel about that teacher? Or what do you feel between you? And I said, friendliness. And she said, yes, just friendliness. So I think it's useful to think about, if you're not communicating with your teachers, it's because you don't actually want to. So that's why we do or don't do anything. We want to or we don't want to. So it might be good to just, in a very sober, mature way, just think about, what is my actual relationship to this person? Put it in its right box. And that might bring down some of the feeling of guilt. You don't have to make it into something. It is what it is, right? So just have a more realistic evaluation of what your relationship to them is, what you really want, and who they really are to you. And if you have a teacher who's really your teacher, we could say a guru or whatever, because there's that in dance and there's that in other spiritual life also. You can just be with them whenever you want. You don't have to be always physically connecting to them or calling them up. So there's that sense that they're with you all the time. So there's those kind of teachers, and then there's other teachers that it's fine not to call. This is a very valuable lesson that I'm passing it on to you from the shaman that I got it from.
You talked a little bit to me before about how to keep something with, like, I have an experience that has some meaning spiritually, a shift or something, and then I need to then integrate that, keep it with, and return to it.
When we have a spiritual experience, how can we integrate it? This is one of the major forms of sadhana, the most important form of sadhana in Trikun Dzogchen Bon, which is that we integrate what we realize into our everyday lives, that we don't just keep it on a cushion for some special moment in our day. And we have to think of our spiritual life and the things that happen to us in a fully embodied way. The best analogy I can give you is, do you like to cook? You may not understand this analogy then, but it's what I got. So, or maybe looking at a menu in a restaurant, someone else is cooking for you. But imagine looking at a menu in a restaurant, trying to decide what to eat, and just thinking about it. So you're not going to let yourself have any embodied memory of what's on that menu. Imagine there's something on the menu for some kind of sandwich with all different kinds of ingredients that you like, but you're only going to look at the picture and you're just going to think about it. You're not going to remember how it tastes or smells. You're not going to remember the texture of it. You're just going to think about it. Weird, right? It's almost like having COVID and losing your sense of smell and taste, right? But normally, how we would decide how to eat in a restaurant is a more embodied experience. When we're looking at the menu items, we're actually having an embodied recollection of what those things taste like. And I was saying about cooking because if you like to cook, if you're planning a meal for guests or something, or even just for yourself, you go to the supermarket and you're walking down the aisle and you're kind of like cooking in your mind. You're like building up what you're going to make. As you're encountering those things in the supermarket, you know what they taste like, you know what they are like when they combine, you know how they're going to look, the finished product. You're kind of like, no, that won't be good. You discard that in your mind. But it's a very embodied experience where you're recalling everything about it and having a feeling about it or a sense of it in your body and in your mind. So there's a difference between that and just thinking about something. Mostly we're trained to go, well, what should I do? Give me these steps of things I can do. How should I relate to this differently in my thoughts? And certainly a lot of American Buddhist traditions encourage that. So people get even more out of touch with their embodied experience. When you have something happen or you have a slow accretion of spiritual experience from doing sadhana every day, and you have some kind of opening and you want to incorporate that into your everyday life, you have to drop into it, just like you would drop into tasting things on a menu when you're trying to decide what to order, or drop into cooking when you're just in the supermarket and you haven't started cooking yet. You need to drop back into that experience with your whole sensorium. What did it feel like? You need to drop back into that. I can't tell you how to do that. This is called pointing out instructions. You can only point towards something. No one can really tell you how to do it. But it does involve a certain amount of reconnecting that disconnect between your senses and your intellect.
Like just driving or doing a task or whatever that can pull me away from my senses or away from that connection. And then all this time goes by where I don't even have any days maybe even where I don't draw in. So
Well, that's absolutely normal. What you're describing is distraction. So our entire karmic lives, karmically impacted, karmically inflected lives, could be described as distraction. We're distracted by thoughts, we're distracted by emotions, we're distracted by repetitive stories about ourselves and other people, we're distracted by past, present, and future. We're just hugely distracted most of the time. And what my Dzogchen teacher said, that the whole process of sadhana is to remain undistracted from the natural state. Remain undistracted from the natural state. That's the whole practice. So once you have some kind of inkling or abiding experience of the natural state, you have to taste it. You have to marinate in it. You have to try to remain in it. You have to bring it back. You have to drop back into it and try to stay there. And it's fleeting. You know, in the beginning, it's like, what? What just happened? And I remember those times really vividly. And then after a while, that ability to relax and be resting in that natural, non-conceptual state remains longer. But then when you lose it, it's even more painful. Because now you've gone into it a little more deeply and you know what it's like, and you don't want to lose it, but you still get distracted. And you're right, days can go by, months, years. Even. If you put a sign on your front door as you left the house that said, remain undistracted from the natural state, and you looked at it when you left the house, you could easily forget to do that for days. And then you could actually get so distracted that you would never even remember to look at the sign. I mean, but under the pressure of daily sadhana, doing daily sadhana, you eventually remember for longer periods of time. And then eventually, you are never out of touch with it. And I can't say when that will happen for anybody, but doing practice every day is the key. Unless you happen to be a Mahasiddha returning to just have one little thing happen to make you enlightened. I don't know, maybe that's your case. But for me, no, that's not my case. I just say that because some people have this idea in their mind that they're going to instantly become enlightened at some magical moment. From my perspective, we need to do things every day in order to get back into the habit of remembering, in order to taste more deeply the natural state until it just sneaks up on you. It just sneaks up on you, and one day you're just in it all the time. But yes, back and forth is not a problem. That's how it works. I mean, it's upsetting, but it's not a problem. Satsang with Shambhavi is produced by Jaya Kula, a nonprofit community offering opportunities to learn and practice in the direct realization traditions of Trika Shaivism and Dzogchen. If you enjoyed listening, please help us keep this podcast and many other teachings open to all by making a monthly or one-time donation. Visit jayakula.org to make a donation and explore more of our offerings.